This week on the 77% Street Debate.
It's a discourse to escape from, that African film is this and this and this.
If we make more movies of how Africa can be, there is a future.
Short film has no places in Ethiopia.
But why then keep producing?
Because it's in your heart.
Hello there and welcome to yet another edition of the Street Debate. But this time it's going to be special because it's an intimate discussion with key players in the film industry from across the continent. We are at the 17th edition of the Africa Film Festival in Cologne, Germany. But the first question is, how important are these festivals? And I address it to you, Jeremiah.
But of course, they make it accessible. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been accessible. I mean, there's like many other filmmakers who have great works, very elegant directors, but the works never get to see the light of the day or be seen by ordinary people, you know. So I'm very happy that there is a festival that they can bring the works to the people.
I want to come to you, Jacqueline.
Yes.
You have international experience curating festivals from the UK. You have worked in Berlin, also curating. What are the lessons that you think that you draw from your experience working also in the Black Star Film Festival and in the international festivals? What are the lessons that you've learned?
Well, lessons is interesting. We've seen more and more films being produced on the continent, and they're being widely disseminated in various festivals around the world. And I think the opportunity now we have is through international film festivals that African films don't necessarily only have to be seen within an African film festival, but also international film festivals, that they can be within the wider programming with American, European films. And I think that's a huge achievement, and that's where we want to go, actually.
An open question. Who benefits the most from the festivals? Is it the directors? Is it the actors? Is it the producers? Who wants to give it a shot?
Everyone. Including the audience. All the people you mentioned and the audience. Those who wouldn't find this like niche content. When it's niche, a variety of content. And when box office isn't the main priority. Mm-hmm. So everyone. And I mean, when I go to festival as an audience, it's heaven.
How is the experience for you?
No, I love it. And I watch films from morning to evening. And during the bad films, I sleep, so I can manage with the good films later. It's perfect.
What are some of the common themes in the films that you've watched?
Love. Yes, that was pretty common in Nollywood films of a particular era. You had family dramas, romantic stories around romance, and some were also like epic narratives where they were set in rural areas or in a historical period. You had a lot of those. But now I think the stories are diversifying pretty much. A lot of different things are happening now, away from regular themes.
Away from love?
Yes,
people have stopped loving each other?
No, they haven't. But I think they've realized, okay, maybe we shouldn't just make romance stories and comedies. Actually, comedies are a hit, always, I think.
You wanted to add on to the common themes that you have noticed over the years. So she has noticed that love started and then slowly it's diversifying. It hasn't ended, it's diversifying. What have been some of the themes that you've observed?
The only thing they have in common is that they are made by people who identify as African. Then it's a variety of films, a variety of genre, a variety of style, variety of voices, variety of priorities, anything. So I can't.
You haven't noticed any thread?
No, and I also even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Because I think it's a discourse to escape from, that African film is this and this and this. It's not. It's films that happen to be made by Africans.
Yeah. But even as filmmakers, whether you identify as African or from wherever in the world, does it matter where the filmmaker is coming from, or are the themes just universal? Maybe you want to answer this, Mante?
Yeah, actually it's universal, whether it's love or fundamentalism is also, universal things. It cannot bound in one region. If you come to eastern part of Africa, or you go to western part of Africa, or northern or south, you have this issue, this theme. So I think it's not bounded in one region or one places, but it's a universal thing, I would say.
Something that is unique and which brings me to the next part of the conversation are the political constraints in filming. You had something that you wanted to share with us of one of your colleagues who is a filmmaker in Ethiopia.
It's a big challenge for African filmmakers. I think it is the same experience would be, I'm not sure whether it's in other African countries, but in Ethiopia there is one film, or it's a sitcom, How May I Serve You? So it's just depicting in a way that the Prime Minister, people say that. So every day they try to bring some issues and then they discuss about that. So this sitcom, television sitcom, is getting is popular, but in between it's taken off from the air. Nobody said that stop it, but in indirect way. Nobody said to you, just you have criticized the government or the politicians. Nobody says anything, but there are systems, indirectly. You cannot see it. For instance, sponsorship. Without sponsorship, you don't have a film fund like here or somewhere else. So you have to have some sponsorship. This sponsorship told to him, we cannot give you any support anymore. They didn't explain about it. Just they said we cannot support you, so he cannot do it anything. But he's struggling to produce it and use it another medium like YouTube or something like that.
People have the expectation that as African filmmakers, you have to speak on certain issues, you have to speak about dictatorship or governance or blah, blah, blah. I would like your perspective on that. I think my personal opinion is that a filmmaker should create art. But the notion is there, the expectation is there that, okay, you should be talking about how bad your governance is in your country. I would just love to get your perspective on that notion.
Yeah, but whose perspective is it? Like, who is asking those questions? We always need to, I think that's the first one. You know? I mean, usually, I think you're probably referring to Western media, that they have certain expectations, and that's a certain view, but I think that's irrelevant. That's completely irrelevant. An African filmmaker has the right to do a film on whatever issues, the way a German filmmaker or like European filmmaker, Asian filmmaker or whatever. So I think, that's, it's not even a debate.
Yeah. You want to add something?
I think to a large extent I agree with what Jackie said, that people are free to basically do what they want to do in terms of the story they want to tell, what they feel is most important that they want to project through their art. So it becomes, what's the word for it now? It becomes strange in a way when you believe that if you type in African film, for example, you expect certain results only to turn up. It's not a good expectation to have. So I guess artists are artists everywhere in the world. People who create or produce are the same everywhere in the world. They have the same impulses. They have the same, possibly the same things that drive them, the same passion or what's it called, or push now, or stimulus, for example. So people are really free to create whatever they want. Because if you, similar to what Katrina was saying, how then are you true to your art if you work only based on criteria that you feel will get you into certain conversations? Then there's a problem.
I think it's a question of how you see and how you choose to see things, because if you see a film and it takes place in Africa, certain people might then be inclined to like they program to think in a certain way, and there's a confusion between plot and premise. The premise might be a war, the premise might be something that some people might think of as uniquely South African, but in fact, what is happening within that premise. I was thinking about Fig Tree, one of the films that showed at the festival. And it takes place in '89, and it takes place during the Ethiopian-Eritrean War. But if someone would ask me what that film is about, it's a love story, and that's it. And then there's war, but that's a premise. It has nothing to do with anything else.
Something that also stood out for me during this festival is that Djibouti is screening the first female director from the country. And this brings me to the issue of gender. I mean, what is the situation, first of all, gender-wise, in terms of filmmaking? This is just one example, Djibouti. It does not represent the continent. But what is the situation on the ground? Jacqueline?
I mean, I don't have exact figures in my head, but like there are a number of African female filmmakers on the continent, and that's been happening actually for a while now, and they're also, you know, telling their stories and from their perspective. Obviously, that has changed over the years. It was mainly male-dominated in the 80s and 90s, but I would say since the late 90s, we find lots of female filmmakers.
How does that balance out in the creation or production of films? Does it mean more productions? Not that the labor is on the women, but what does that mean then, that we have more female filmmakers?
It's a good question. I mean, I can only speak with South African film industry. It's only now. I mean, that industry has been going on for about 20 years, the feature films, and it's far from transformed the way it should be, but more black filmmakers are coming up. But it's only in the last year, or maybe 2 years, that women filmmakers have come up. And they have added to the landscape of film. I don't think, even if resources are scarce, it's not a question of a zero-sum game that we have less of other voices, but many more women filmmakers, and not just in South Africa. And it's the same thing as all over the world, right? Because it's an terribly exclusive industry and business in itself everywhere. So we see the same changes in Africa as we do elsewhere, which is nice, which is amazing. Yeah. And you can see it also in story and in gazes and everything. It's very exciting.
It is exciting indeed. Where do you get the money? This is the question that I want to ask, especially Jeremiah and Mante here. Where do you get money to make films? I mean, you took 3 weeks to produce this film that is showing here. Where can filmmakers get money? First, tell us your story.
First of all, people can have a collective and make films, and whatever they have, they chip in and create films. I come from that space, and also, of course, you have funds. Unfortunately, in my country, we don't have film funds, so we rely on the funds from whether it's the corporate actions, whether the corporate action between French or German, or Luxembourg, whatever, different countries. Nowadays, you don't have to have expensive equipment to make a film. You can use what you have. You can have a collective, and you start to grow, you start to develop more films, until you have something that you like.
Mante?
Yeah.
What's your stand?
I think I'm tending to in that way, because, you know, collaboration is your financial source, I would say. Because, you know, I'm producing in Ethiopia short film. So short film is not in Ethiopia well known. People are watching feature films, especially romantic comedy. So if you do, even when you if you want to produce a feature film with different genres than romantic comedy, then you don't have any chance. The producers are trying to ask you to write a romance comedy film. When I tell you about my experience, short film has no places in Ethiopia, so you produce it for feature, for festivals, otherwise you don't have any chance to produce a short film and presenting to society. You cannot do that.
But if I may cut you short, but why then keep producing?
Because it's in yours, it's in your heart. So you know that I'm a journalist, but I'm doing as an independent filmmaker. So when I say collaboration, it's not only collaboration, but I have to save from my salary. I have to keep it. I have to cut my different things to produce film in a low budget.
You work with what you have. And I also think that, and I think this is also interesting for Europe, because the film funding landscape is changing everywhere, right? And depending on the political dispensation of countries, films, it's difficult to fund films everywhere in the world. And more and more people are trusting informal sources and informal ways of sourcing resources together, and independent ways of working. And that for me also makes for stories that are much, much more interesting, because it is in that resistance, it is in this, it's not something that you try to eliminate, it's something that you work with and around, and that for me makes for such interesting storytelling. I always joke, but I'm not joking. I'm saying that Europe has run out of stories. I don't think interesting stories don't come from Europe anymore when it's from that established scene, the independent cinema, and especially when you see first, second and third, etc. generations of European making films. I mean, that makes me super excited. And then I'm thinking European cinema isn't dying. But without glorifying lack of resources, I think there's some amazing things that come up from that.
Yeah. And this brings me the collaborative power. You have acted as an actress in a documentary. Did you contribute in this collaboration, and what was your contribution? Like, was it just in acting for free, or actually even paying to act?
It was acting for free, but for me, I had a whole experience, which for me was more than whatever money they could pay me. I had the chance to travel Africa, to get to know my roots, to get to know brothers and sisters over there. But to come back of what she was saying, I do think that today, with platforms such as Instagram and YouTube, more African actors have the opportunity and the chance to show what they have and what they can do with the little resources that they have, and to put it out there in the world. And I hope that people see it and they're appreciative of it, and that they want to later sponsor these filmmakers, because I think it is easier in maybe Europe or America to start a film and to look for funds, while in Africa that is not the case. But now with platforms as YouTube, they can reach out and show what they can do with, I think they use smartphones now or older video cameras and things, but their movies are still very interesting. So if they have more funds, more budget, what can they create? And they shouldn't just stick to, as you were saying, like the problems in Africa. They can just have their fantasy movies. They can just let their imagination go loose and make a movie of how they think Africa should be. Because I think right now we're so focused on how Africa is, and we are always showing those stories. So anytime we watch those films, we just see, okay, when I go out, this is what I know. But if we make more movies of how Africa can be, more people like you and me would watch it and think like, okay, yes, maybe today if I go outside, I'll act more like this movie that I just watched. So I do think there is a future. There is really a future in African film, but we shouldn't sit down and think like, okay, we don't have the funds, so we're not gonna do anything. Let's use what we have and put it out there. We are not waiting for people to help us. Let's help ourselves and show them what we can do before we got helped.
To just backtrack a little, you said that we should, filmmakers rather, should create movies or films about how Africa could be. Yeah. Is it your belief that films can change stereotypes?
I really do believe that, yes.
Okay. It's up to you. If you're watching this video, tell us what you think. Can films change stereotypes or not? Is it even the responsibility of filmmakers to change your stereotype of the African continent? I don't know. Comment below and let us know. Now, as we come towards the end, Nollywood is, of course, the success story. You mentioned it earlier. I mean, it is the second biggest employer after agriculture in Nigeria. If there's one thing you could do to make your country get to the level of Nollywood, what would you start with?
I think that Nollywood is as great as it is right now, because people in Nigeria have stood still and realized how big film is and how much people are reached by it. So I think if other African countries just sit back and think, okay, our people look TV, they watch it and every day they're amused by it. Let's invest in that. And that, I think that is a step closer to starting a film industry as big as Nollywood. That's my opinion.
But where would the investment start? Is it with the filmmaker? Is it with the actors? Is it with the cinemas as well?
I think it is with the people who run the TV. First of all, I think they stream movies from outside. So if they start giving their filmmakers the platform to show their movies, that is a step in the right direction.
Jeremiah.
I wasn't sure if I should comment on this because the Nigerian model is so different from my country and many other countries. They can master the model because there are many people. There's an audience for their content. But in my country it's different. So the model is sort of different.
What would be the model in your country?
I don't know. But I feel like in my country, I think it's more like, we have filmmakers who are depending on the aid. Like they make like NGO films, which I understand because people need to pay their rent and stuff. I totally understand that. But I feel like maybe if people could just, few people can focus on developing that story while they're getting the aid money to develop NGO films. But I feel like that sense of agency, it's what I think it's needed for my country, the sense of agency to create films. So for me, I feel like just a sense of agency. People should have a sense of agency to create why they create, like a breathing, in a way. Yeah.
Katerina.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the obvious answer to the question would be like the state support, a visionary state that knows the importance of having a thriving industry and help building stable structures. And I live in South Africa where I mean, compared to most countries on the continent, that actually exists, but it's still, it's not perfect. It's far from perfect. But I don't think it's enough to, state support, and people have talked about that for several years. Yeah, we need strong state support, but that doesn't happen. And I do think that since that doesn't happen, what filmmakers and artists can go back to is always themselves and work with the circumstances. I mean, Nollywood happens because there's a certain infrastructure, certain things that worked in favor of Nollywood. So Nollywood, even if Ethiopia has a similar video industry, Ghana has, but it doesn't happen in the same way. But every country works from its own premises and like you said, collaborate and work together and do it regardless. So I don't know what the goal is not necessarily for me to have a certain number of films, but to have people, as long as enough people can do it, and it actually, again, without glorifying poverty and scarce resources, also people have to go together and do with what they have.
I mean, I would of course start by saying, even in Nigeria, not every filmmaker identifies as a Nollywood filmmaker, because Nollywood is pretty much, it has its own kind of criteria. Fine, it's a broad label now that many people use to describe the Nigerian film industry, but it has its own like standard of production, or not particularly standard. It has its own production process. And it was also pretty much typified by certain kinds of films. But of course, it's used regularly as a broad label. But not everyone would say they are Nollywood filmmakers. And you see that sometimes in their production models and in their distribution models as well. And speaking as well about distribution, I wouldn't say Nigeria has a strong film distribution infrastructure. So I guess that's also a general problem for all of us.
This seems to be a very common kind of thread. How can we improve it? Does anyone want to pick this one up?
It's not a solution, but there are also things coming up, and I'm just trusting others will fix things. But I mean, technological things. I mean, so you have Netflix, for example, and they have a growing number of African films and TV series. So that's one thing that is happening, and after Netflix will come something else. So.
And there's also Iroko that is
exactly.
showcasing.
Yeah, exactly.
There's Viusasa in Kenya, if you're watching. Like the channels are there, but maybe more marketing needs to be done that people can access or know where to access this film.
Into the question of access to funding for these things, because you need funding to market, you need funding to promote films, really. Yes.
Yeah, but sometimes you learn you produce your film after you gather a lot of money, and then Then when you use YouTube or something like that, sometimes you may lose something. Especially when I told about my country, people are, when you post something on YouTube, that's also another challenge, you know, concerning to the distribution. When you upload things on YouTube, people try to take it and then put it on their page. I mean, on their, as it is their own. That could be also a challenge. So concerning to the distribution.
Piracy.
So piracy, yeah.
Thank you so much for your honoring us with your presence at the 77 Street discussion this time. It was a very special one because we had a very intimate discussion with stakeholders in the film industry from across different countries in Africa. Thank you.